And we are live. Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to our little weekly Wave Warriors session. And we are here to talk about the Southern resident orcas, talk about what we can do to help save the Southern residents, and just some of the initiatives that we're working on and excited about for 2024. So I am joined by the awesome Riley. Riley, for those who perhaps are just tuning in for the first time, can you tell us who you are, what you do, and why you are deeply passionate about these magnificent creatures?
Well, hi, Rachel. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be on your show. I'm Riley Starks. I'm the executive director and founder of the Salish Center for Sustainable Fishing Methods. I've been a commercial fisherman all my life, and I'm a reef net fisher. And I started the nonprofit 5 years ago. Just around the time that an extraordinary event happened where Telequa, one of the southern resident orcas, gave birth to a child that died within really minutes, half an hour of being born. And she was in such a state of grief that she carried this dead baby, on her nose for 17 days, traveling almost 2,000 miles in a dramatic display of grief. And it captured the imagination of the world, and people started thinking about, oh my God, who are these orcas and why are they starving to death? And I think it woke everybody up. It woke me up. When I started the nonprofit, it was not about that. That event had not yet happened. It was months away. But the reason I started it was to educate people about the reef net fishing itself and the connection it has to southern resident orcas.
So one of the things that we as Wave Warriors have had two orcas kind of at our heart, and that is Telequa, who you just spoke of, and her dead baby, and this horrible story that is just like you said, a display of grief. But we also have Toki in our hearts. Toki is Tokitae, who was given kind of the stage name of Lolita during captivity. I think one of the things that is we can take from that awful experience, the experience being that this poor orca spent over 50 years in captivity, was planning to be reunited perhaps with her pod, but at least brought back to the Pacific Northwest. And then just a few months prior to that, that plan actually being actualized, she passed away. And, we want to be able to say that something positive came out of that. And I think one thing that did really come out of it was the idea that people's perception of these beautiful creatures being in captivity has really shifted, right? It's become a renewed sense of advocacy for these beautiful creatures. Do you think that visibility that we've had around Toki can translate to people being more engaged with the work that we're trying to do?
Oh yes, for sure. I mean, just the activity around Toki prior to maybe a year or even 2 years prior to the date when she was supposed to come back to the Salish Sea, people started realizing and understanding who these southern residents are, and why they're not that every orca doesn't matter, but why these matter a lot, because they're a small, discrete population that only resides in the Salish Sea, and they've evolved for 10,000 years with the Fraser River king salmon, and it's not. I mean, their world was perfect until 100 some odd years ago when we showed up and started overfishing and playing around with with the ecosystem. And, in the last 30 years, their food source has dried up, and they've been starving to death. And they've had to wander far and wide to find salmon. Not necessarily Fraser, even though that's their favorite, but king salmon especially, just to stay alive. And so they've changed their habits, their hunting habits, and somewhat, but they're not going to change their diet. Every other orca population in the world live on marine mammals, and this is the only population that needs salmon to survive. And so it's acute. It's acute right now. It has been for a while, and the reason my nonprofit, our nonprofit, is so involved in this is because we're the only commercial fishery that can catch salmon and release unwanted species unharmed. And
you've gone to some extreme lengths, or people have gone to some extreme lengths to make sure that those Chinook actually get to the orcas during a time of starvation. Can you touch on that? How
yeah,
that was
yeah. This was It was 5 years ago, and I got a call from a Lummi Nation tribal member, and they were just distraught. Nobody knew what to do, and everybody felt so helpless. And so they called me and said, "Well, could you save your Chinook salmon when you're fishing?" Because we had certain openings where we're allowed to fish, and we catch, all species, but we let go what we're not allowed to keep, and Chinook is one of those things. And so they came to us, and got to let my dog in. Sorry. Come on in, Stella.
We love Stella.
So they came to us, and we saved our Chinook, and they pulled alongside with their tribal fishery boat, and they had live wells on the boat. And so we took the Chinook out of our live well, which, they can stay alive indefinitely, really, in the live well. And they had mounted a water cannon on their boat. The idea being that they'd take the live Chinook and they'd shoot them out of this water cannon towards Tokitae, Talequa, and that then there wouldn't be an association with the boat and food because it just seemed to be shot from nowhere. And it was a great idea, and it was a noble effort. It didn't succeed, really. One thing that happens with orcas is they won't eat dead fish, period, but they won't even eat injured fish. And even though these fish weren't injured, they had some aura about them. Who knows? Anyway, it didn't work. But
why are these fish flying? This is there's something mentally wrong.
Something wrong here. But it was just an attempt, it was doing something, and it made me realize how important reef net fishing is, because we were the only gear type they could come to. All the gear types, purse seiners and gill netters, were fishing during that time, but they didn't go to them; they came to us. And to me, that means that it's understood the good that we can do. And it doubled down our efforts to make a difference for the southern resident orcas.
Something I was thinking about when I was getting ready for this call was, for those who don't know the context of the plans behind bringing Toki home to the Pacific Northwest, just for context, she was in Miami Seaquarium for many, many years. The plan to bring her home had been in the works, and people have been trying to make it happen for years. And the only way that it was actually going to happen was because Jim, an unlikely story, right? Jim Irsay, who is the owner of the Indianapolis Colts, had pledged to a huge amount of money. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was several
20 million.
$20 million.
20 million. Mm-hmm.
Insane amount of money. And he had pledged this money to be able to fly her home. And we were talking about a several thousand ton being, right? To be able to build a facility, I believe off of Orcas Island, somewhere up there, that would allow Toki to readjust and acclimate to the waters of the Salish Sea, and then potentially introduce us. So it's going to be this huge kind of drawn out process. And I can't help but feel like we need to, that it shouldn't just stop there with Toki's passing. Like maybe we need right now to ask Jim to listen and maybe consider pledging some of that commitment that he had initially made to Toki to the region. And while we couldn't save Toki, we can save Toki's family and Toki's descendants and the legacy of the southern resident orcas. So if we were to say something to Jim now that he could have a real impact, what would you say?
Well, that's a really, really good idea. What I would say is the future of the southern resident orca depends on the future of salmon, and the future of salmon depend on protecting the watersheds, getting rid of farmed Atlantic salmon in BC waters, and really in not catching species that are fragile. I mean, really sort of encouraging the proliferation of reef nets to harvest the Fraser River salmon, because my dog.
Bella has a lot to say about this. Bella is our canine wave warrior. So let's do this, because I think we can actually, we're kind of ideating, and I didn't even mention to Riley that we were going to talk about this, but I think it's actually really important. If the $20 million that Jim was going to spend to bring Toki home, let's think about what kind of an impact $20 million could have on the 74 remaining southern resident orcas that are Toki's family, right? When we talk about reef net fishing, this is a 1,800-year-old profession. It's something that it's indigenous, an indigenous technique, and you can essentially train a reef netter and build a reef net for what were the numbers that we were talking about?
Well, the training part is, we figure it's about $30,000 to encourage a fisher to take up reef netting, because we would have to pay them to learn,
right?
And possibly house them. Hard to say, but it would be a 3-month project, and then to actually build reef net gear is about $100,000, maybe a little bit more. The infrastructure is all there for it. I mean, it's here. Reef nets are not something that you can buy off the shelf. There aren't boat builders that specifically build reef netters, because there's only 12. There's only 12 of us now, 12 gears. So, and most people don't see a broad future for reef netting, but I do, and I think that we can encourage not just fishers to take it up, but also for regulators, fishery managers, to allow reef nets to take fish, so that they get enough time on the water and a big enough harvest to where it's actually, you can actually make a living doing it. Right now, we get so little time that it's not a hobby, but it's it's a work of love, really, every year. And the people who reef net would never give it up. They're people reef net into their 90s, literally. But 12 is a small voice, and reef netting is the future of the Salish Sea. There's no doubt in my mind. If there is ever to be a commercial fishery in the Salish Sea, in the final end, it'll be reef netting once again. Whereas 1800 years ago, and prior to settlers coming, there were hundreds and hundreds of reef net sites, and those sites still exist. The salmon still swim right by them, so there's no reason why we can't do this.
So we're talking, teach a man to fish, potentially give a man or woman the opportunity to have an income, a sustainable income, whilst simultaneously ensuring that the one food source that these southern resident orcas actually eat remains in the Salish Sea and keeps that ecosystem healthy and safe. So for $130,000, essentially $100,000 to build a reef net, $30,000 to essentially train and pay a future reef netter, we can really start to make an impact. So when you're talking $20 million, imagine how many reef netters and reef netting gears could be created and set up for the foreseeable future.
Boggles the mind, frankly, because we tend to think on a pretty small scale, but the fact is that those 74 or 75 southern resident orcas who remain are depending on us. It's our fault that they're having problems. It's not their fault. They're doing what they've done for 10,000 years, and we have just mucked it up. It's not hopeless at all. It's a problem that can be solved. We just have to concentrate and focus the effort in doing that.
And let's go one step further with this, because I think that this is a good way to look at what is actually possible with the right support. So we've talked about advocacy being a huge part of it, training reef netters being a huge part of this. What about the scientific research and its impact on the region? So one of the things that we want to do as Wave Warriors is to fund vital scientific research. And right now, the beneficiary of that we'll be providing funds to is an initiative called Oceans Initiative. Now, you've shared with me a study by, I believe it was Alexandra Morton, and its impact. Let's talk about that. And this is an example of some of the things that people's dollars and donations can potentially impact.
Oh, absolutely. And the story of Alexandra Morton is kind of a classic story of someone who's willing to think outside the box, go against the paradigm, and to really look at what was happening. She was, as a young woman, wanted to study southern resident orcas, and so she went up to Vancouver Island, and she started studying them. And along the way, she did some salmon studies too, and she realized once these salmon farms came, maybe I think it's probably been 20 years now, that salmon smolts were being killed by just the proliferation of sea lice that surrounds these giant salmon pens. And if you think about it, these pens they don't belong. Salmon don't belong where the pens were located, which is in the waters just outside the river. And around them, the tightly packed fish, there's a kind of a slurry of sea lice and defecation and antibiotics, all kinds of stuff. That's a cloud. And these smolts, when they come out of the Fraser River, they have to go right through those waters where the Atlantic salmon pens are located, and because throughout evolutionary time, there was never any reason for a salmon smolt to have any armor or scales, because there was nothing it had to protect against, because there were no sea lice. But once these salmon farms were put there were all these sea lice, and one sea louse can kill a pink salmon smolt. And when Alexander Morton started, trying to publish the studies that she was doing, she was completely shunned by the scientific community and by the fisheries biologists. She couldn't get a peer-reviewed paper published. She was just an outlier. She was self-funding.
Why is that? Why is there such rejection of?
Well, because everybody wanted to believe that these Atlantic salmon farms were a good thing, and they didn't want a naysayer around who could, maybe kill the golden goose. They were paying lots of money to be able to site those farms there. Everybody was making money. They were funding schools for their workers. They were being good corporate citizens, but they weren't being honest, and they weren't being good environmental citizens. And Alexandra Morton was a fly in the ointment. But through the help of many, many people, but one person was Rob Williams from Oceans Initiative. He helped her get her first paper published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal. And it started this process of people realizing that, wow, maybe she's right. Maybe this is true. And 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago now, she was able to get 15 salmon farms dismantled in the islands just outside of the Fraser River, and right where the smolts swim through. And she, her studies showed that if we got rid of those pens, then when the smolts came through, they would survive, and then would come back, their next cycle in bigger numbers. And since it was just 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, it was the pink salmon who only lived 2 years. So pinks are the shortest lived salmon. They go out, and 2 years later they come back. And so the proof would be, if she was right, that those pinks that went out 2 years ago, so this year is the year they came back. So 2 years before that, they should show up in bigger numbers. And lo and behold, we had a record pink salmon run. And in fact, Alexander Morton wrote, what she said is, this is my last paper. She did studies during those 2 years of smolts and infestation of sea lice, and the graph was like straight down. Just she said, it's like this proves everything, and there was no infestations of the smolts going out. They came back in record numbers, and we expect that sockeye and all the rest of the salmon are 4-year species. In 2 more years, we're going to see big runs, and then maybe we can get rid of all of those salmon farms that are destroying the ecosystem, destroying the wild salmon runs that the southern resident orcas rely on. Mm-hmm. That's a big ask, and it takes serious guts on the part of government people and fisheries managers to pull this off. But it's the right thing to do. It will return more to society, more to to the environment in many, many different ways than ever could be produced by those salmon farms.
You know, and this is not your first rodeo in terms of like seeing a direct impact of research, assessing a situation and making change. Tell us a little bit about Dungeness crabs and your trip in a helicopter.
Yeah. So I started fishing Dungeness crabs in 1973 here in the Salish Sea. And since I had graduated college in political science, naturally I became a founding president of a group called the Inter-Sound Crab Association. And at that time, there were 16 draggers, bottom trawlers, that worked out of Blaine and Bellingham. And we noticed that they would drag for flounder, which is a very low value bottom fish, from Whitehorn right into Birch Bay, right at the time when the Dungeness crab were molting. And when dungies molt, they essentially back out of their hard shell. So they crack the back open, they back out of it, and what they have protecting them is nothing. It's like paper. You could punch a hole in it with your finger, and it takes several weeks for that to harden up. So they're very, very vulnerable. And just for that reason, the flounder were going in at that time. Why? I don't know, but we saw draggers pulling up their bags, just oozing jelly of thousands of Dungeness crab. And so we hired a helicopter, and I think this was in 75, 76. We hired a helicopter and flew over one of the draggers pulling his bag up and had a video camera, which in those days they were pretty big cameras. Anyway, but we got the film and you could see it. You could see it happening. And we gave that to fisheries managers as further proof that draggers were very bad for the Salish Sea. They knew it already. There are lots of different studies that showed that they depleted the rockfish and other things. But I don't know if they really knew that they were killing soft shell crabs at the same time. And so whether that was a nail in the coffin, I don't know, but it took another 10 or 15 years for the fisheries managers to get up the courage to retire every single dragger in the Salish Sea. And it was, I can only say that that takes guts, because I don't know if draggers are mean. You do not want to cross a dragger, and but they managed to do that, and because of that, I'm going to say another maybe 10 years later, the crab population almost tripled. When I was crabbing myself, I did it for 17 years. Our average catch, I think, in the whole Inter-Sound was 5 million pounds. Now, typical is 12 million pounds.
Wow.
And not just quantity, but the quality of the crabs are much, much better. Over the last, and they taste delicious. But over the last 3 years, I have handled the biggest Dungeness crab in my entire life. And I've over 17 years of commercial fishing, I handled thousands and thousands of crabs. So it just means that they're not overfished. They're given time to grow another cycle, another year, and get bigger. Mm-hmm. And with crab, the bigger, actually with all seafood, the bigger, the older, the better. That results in better flavor. It's just a pleasure, to handle these large crabs. And not only the Dungeness crab benefited, but also the halibut benefited. Before, when the draggers were dragging, and even, for maybe 10 years after, there was no halibut fishery in the Salish Sea. It was all in the ocean, all in Alaska, all along the coast. But because halibut take 10 years they have to be 10 years old to spawn. They were never allowed to grow that old. But with the draggers not operating, suddenly they were allowed to grow. And now there is a sizable, I'm going to say a couple 100,000 pound quota for the tribal commercial fishers for these halibut, which are amazing halibut, and then an equal amount for non-tribal sport fishermen. So this was an unintended consequence of the dragging, but it's made a giant difference.
And that's all from the advocacy and action of one individual. Like, I know you're not somebody who takes praise well, but like, you saw a problem, you investigated the problem, and you knew the action that had to be taken. Like, if we have more people doing that essential research and paying attention to the critical issues, the impact could be tremendous. And I'm thinking about, go ahead, please.
Well, it's not enough. It's not enough to do it. It has to be seen. It has to be known about. It has to be believed, and that is the hard part. That's where $20 million could make a big difference in research. I mean, every nonprofit I know about scrambles for dollars. It's just all they want to do is fund their projects, and it's very hard. So, I mean, all these things that benefit the orcas in the Salish Sea, we're not talking about huge amounts of money, but we're talking about some money.
So let's think of it this way. So I'm speaking directly to Jim right now. This is to Mr. Ursay. So you, Jim, was willing to invest $20 million very generously to safeguard, to protect, and to ensure the future of one southern resident orca, Tokitae. What happens to the remaining 74 southern resident orcas if we do nothing? What happens, Riley?
Well, I think most people believe that the orcas are listed as endangered for a reason, and I think many people don't think that they will survive into the future, but everybody wants it. Everybody's trying to figure out ways to mitigate the harm that we do, and so it's not like the desire isn't there. It's just that the effort is difficult and expensive, and it's there's so many other things that are that require attention that this is just one of them.
They need a hero. They need a Jim Irsay to protect and preserve their future and safeguard the babies that are being born right now. We're seeing new babies. I believe there was 2 in the last year, but we need to protect them because everything is against them right now. And if we have the opportunity to gain some funding, I think we can truly make an impact. And I think one of the things that we also haven't touched on yet is the role that we see education playing in this whole process of really protecting and safeguarding them, and particularly to younger children. You've talked about 9 and 10-year-olds, and I'd love for you to share why you feel that age particularly is where we need to be focusing our discussions.
Well, I go with my gut usually, and I remember what I was like when I was 9 and 10, and it's an age when you're still have a sense of wonder, sense of awe. It's an age when you're capable of doing things that can make a difference. You're not just soaking it up like a sponge. You're also acting out, and and yet so many 9 and 10-year-olds don't even have access to the Salish Sea. They don't know. There's just so little curriculum, and so little life experience for children that age. And yet, if you expose them to this at that age, it will stay with them for life. I mean, one example, Rob Williams said, Ocean's Initiative. He said the reason he started this lifelong study of southern resident orcas was because of his fourth grade teacher. And I remember my fourth and fifth grade teachers, and the things they cared about, I cared about, because they inspire, and I think that's where the emphasis should be placed. And I know there are efforts underway. There's several small school efforts to do that. But the problem in our school system is just no funding. If we were to do a curriculum, and it'll be self-funded. The school cannot afford to help in any way, and that's really sad for our children. But it's the reality that we're living in.
And one of the things that we would do with substantial funding is to hire somebody who we already have in mind right now to facilitate education programs, to actually go out and visit schools on the ground and provide visual learning tools to actually connect them on a human level with these creatures, because they are sentient beings. We do know a lot about their intellect and their intelligence, and we want young people to understand that, so that as they grow, like you so well put it, like they will feel that deep connection and continue to hopefully advocate for them. And so we do have a mammoth task, and we will require funding to be able to do this. But I think that there's organizations in different aspects of this mission, right? There's people doing scientific research, there's people looking at closing fisheries, there's people looking at education. But what we're trying to be is kind of the facilitator of all that. We're kind of the top of the triangle that's saying these are the critical needs. We can see it from a high level, and we want to distribute those funds where we know they can make a real lasting impact.
Yeah.
So any final thoughts? I know we've talked about nothing that we planned to talk about today, but I think this was really, really important.
Yeah, I do too. There's such an emotional attachment to the southern resident orcas. I think a lot of it is because they're a matriarchal society. They're an ancient matriarchal community. They have existed, on this scale, a much bigger scale, really, for millennia, and we need them. We need them in our lives.
Yeah, we do. Somebody just put in the comments that they joined. I love that. Thank you, Help Orca. And if you're wondering what Help Orca is referring to, joining our mission, if you want to support on a very kind of human level, you can adopt an orca, and you can do that at adoptorca.org, and you can learn much more about what's involved in that and what we provide you with. And of course, it is tax deductible. You can do that either for yourself or for a business. But what we're talking about today is, much bigger. We are thinking long-term about solutions, and we are seeking major donors to be able to allow us to do the work that we know is necessary. One of the things I would love for you to close with, Riley, is something that I spoke with Larry about last time, and that's just the majesty of these creatures, and how when you have an encounter with them, what that experience is like. Because I haven't had that privilege, but I know everybody that does, when they share about it, their whole being lights up. Can you share one or two? It
is. It's like you hold your breath. I mean, every single time you see an orca. I remember I used to own the Willows Inn here on the island, and on from our deck there, we could see the orcas. The southern residents would come down, moving south, right along our beach. And in those days, there weren't really a lot of whale boats or anything. It was just the orcas. And I would run around. We had 9 rooms, and I would run around to all of the 9 rooms and bang on the door or ring a bell and say, "The orcas are here. The orcas are here." And people would come down and stand on that deck, and I mean, just behold, you know, behold. It's the sense of reverence and awe every time you see them.
Well, folks, hold that in your heart and, think about how you can be a part of this mission. And perhaps, if it's not for you, perhaps share this message with somebody, pass this along, consider making a donation, consider adopting an orca during the holiday season. And thank you for joining us. And Riley, thank you for your time. And thank you to Help Orca, who I believe has just adopted an orca. So welcome, friend. We're glad that you are a part of our mission.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks, everyone. We'll be back after the holidays.